It's better than my name.
That would have been a terrible way to start this session.
Well, it's already live,
I
so.
have a German family too. My mom's name is Haas.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Well, welcome this evening to the catechetical session, those of you who are physically here and those of you who are coming virtually. If I don't have your current legal name, full name, the patron saint that you are feeling attracted to, or who's calling you, or if you don't have one of those, why just put a question mark, and then of course your sponsor. It's normally a male for a male and a female for a female, and they need to be Orthodox for your sponsors. And it will actually be this coming Sunday. We will admit catechumens, and the catechumens need to be here because in between Orthros and the Divine Liturgy is when you'll actually be admitted as catechumen. And then you all know there's a point in the Divine Liturgy where I ask you all to come forward for that. So it'll be quite something, and then we'll have a group photo afterwards. Oh my goodness sakes. All right, some other things. This evening, we're going to be looking at the Catechetical Homily of St. Cyril of Jerusalem. This book, which is called Lectures on the Christian Sacraments, is part of the popular patristic series published by SVS Press. I know it well. It's one of those that we decided that we would have both Greek and English text, just because the series is exactly what the name says. It is extremely popular, and it's been expanded considerably, particularly in areas of catechetics. So we'll be looking at that. That's so significant because, as I said last week, this is St. Cyril of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, is important for what reason?
It's where Jesus was crucified.
Yeah, it is the Holy Land. And so people began forming our liturgical life, forming the essential teachings, dogmas, theology of the church, based on actual physical locale and other things in Jerusalem. Heavily Jewish, of course, and so the Christians really had to work in a particular kind of teaching methodology that was right culturally, and we continue to make those kinds of adaptations. My experience with Yupik culture in Alaska. Yupiks are the word Eskimo that you hear a lot, like Eskimo pie, is not a particularly welcomed term amongst native Alaskans. It means raw fish eaters, and it's a white name for them. Their own name is Yupik, or if you're further north, it's the Inupiat. But our Orthodox population is very heavy amongst the Yupiks. But the Yupiks are not a particularly verbal culture, and they understand silence quite well, and will often come and sit in the presence of an elder and not speak. Yet there's a sense of satisfaction, and it helps them to sort of sort themselves out. They're also not a written culture, but they're fantastic storytellers and make incredible preachers because of that particular kind of gift. So we do adapt as we go along. So we'll be looking at that. We're also going to begin looking at really how one became a Christian in the early church, and build upon those foundational things that we've been looking at already. So we'll next week look at the Catechetical Discourse of St. Gregory of Nyssa. Okay, so it's another SVS Press book. For those of you that are physically here, I'll send it around. I'm not asking you to buy it, but if you'd like to have it, it's available. But you can have a quick look at it, and we'll be looking at that one next week. There's this one, which again is just really quite incredible. It is the testament of the Lord, worship and discipline in the early church. And I made mention last week, and several of you sort of followed up with me. The whole concept of how one worships is so significant for us because of a Latin phrase, lex orende, lex credende. Have any of you ever heard that phrase before? Okay, it's Latin, so it means how you worship expresses what you believe. How you pray, oros, expresses what it is that you believe. So how we worship, what we hear when you and I are gathered in the temple in worship, expresses what it is that we believe. And even our physical actions, respond to that. So that's not some kind of new thing that some guy invented in Topeka, Kansas in 1906, like the Pentecostals. This is how things evolved in the church. So that's very significant. Another one is this one, which you will recognize immediately, on the two ways. And the two ways we learned in the Didache were one path leads to
Life, death.
death, one path leads to
Death.
life. Yes. Yeah, you're good candidates for orthodoxy. So life or death, light or darkness, foundational text in the tradition. Okay, so there are things like the Didache, the teaching of the apostles, the letter to Barnabas, all of these things, which you're already familiar with. So that's another one. Okay, and then maybe 2 weeks from today, I'm going to delve into the first catechetical instructions from Augustine of Hippo. This is an old book, the Ancient Christian Writers book. Just because, again, it's very significant to see someone like Augustine who his mother basically prayed him into the church. And he was what we would call these days a rather undisciplined problem child. But that work is very, very significant. So we'll be looking there. And then we'll follow up and we'll begin to then look at the formation of the Nicene Creed. Because as we said last week, you get to 316, and what big thing happened then?
The Edict of Milan.
Pardon?
The Edict of Milan.
Yeah. Pax Romana. And the peace of Constantine. So that changes things. So it doesn't take long for the church to begin to say, okay, we need to formulate certain things. So by 325, 1,700 years ago, the church convened, called by the emperor, and formulated the Nicene Creed as you and I recite it. That is without the filioque, the addition of and the Son, which came later in the West. So we'll look at the Creed. We'll then move to the Our Father. And from there, we're probably going to launch into how did the church actually spread. There's some interesting things that I'll probably reference. For instance, Rodney Stark, whom I have an enormous respect for, who died actually during the COVID pandemic. He's not a theologian. He was a religious sociology professor at Baylor University. He has a theory about how the church grew so rapidly after the Peace of Constantine because it was largely made up of women. And we do know that. A lot of Roman senators' wives converted to Christianity. And there's this kind of false image about, how things were in the Roman Empire and the place of women. But it's like that great line in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And it is the neck that moves the head. So Rodney Stark's theory is that women were so influential. I mean, you can actually sort of see some of these pagan Roman senators coming home to their Christian wives. It's like, I'd rather go to the bar tonight, fellas, because my wife's been to church. It's that kind of thing. But it also, because Christianity brought this sense of place of women that was absent in the pagan religions, was anti-abortion, pro-child, all of those kinds of things like that. So that's something from Rodney Stark. But however we want to look at it, the church grew incredibly rapidly, and I think that may be one of the fault lines with Rodney Stark's theory, which is it spread incredibly rapid, and it spread because of the way that the Roman Empire was so incredibly large. I mean, you can go to Hadrian's Wall in northern England, and all the way stretching down across North Africa and throughout the Middle East. The Roman Empire was huge. Okay? Any questions about what I've just been prattling on about? Yes.
Weren't slaves also a big percentage of the early
Yes,
Christians?
yes. Whole households converted. And there's actually instructions in here about that, how baptisms were done. Children of converts to Christianity were baptized with their parents, whether they were infants in arms or not. Pardon?
That's a fun discussion with the people who don't believe in infant baptism.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, all you have to do is have a look at our history. And when you know our Jewish roots, no Jew would deny their child being excluded from the covenant relationship. It just wouldn't be done. All right, one of these, and I'll move on here.
I'm organizing it for you. You can go through what you want.
Oh, thank you. All right. So, St. Cyril of Jerusalem. I think that we've already established the significance there. So, the early work done with translations of some of these patristic texts, which are so early, remember what date we thought the Didache probably will settle it on?
30 AD?
50 to 70, somewhere in there before the fall of the temple in 70 AD. Well, that's older than much of the canonical scriptures. So you look at the first translation of Cyril's work into English, the Pro-Catechesis and the Mystagogical. You know that word, Mystagogical? That's after baptismal instructions. It was done and published in 1838 by R.W. Church. It was published by SPCK, which is the Society for the Propagation of the Church, in 1951. So we aren't talking about ancient stuff. And then it was published first in 1977 by SVS Press. But I'm saying all of this because it also says it has stood the test of time. Because so many young academics and young scholars began, wetting their beak, as they say, in all of this. And everybody looks for some kind of correction of an error or something new and all the rest. But when one delves into the text, one sees that this text, which we're going to hear some from tonight, has for decades proven to be the tool for teachers of the faith, students of the faith about early Christianity, and the other thing which is so significant here, which is early liturgy. Liturgia in Greek means in English more or less the work of the people. And that's because when you and I are at worship as Orthodox Christians, it's like symphony. Everybody's got parts and responses to play. And when you see a hierarchical liturgy, when all the players are present with the bishop and with a deacon or deacons, it's great fun with multiple deacons. The movements are a little bit more in sync, fun. And then multiple presbyters, the chanters, the choir, the faithful, all of that at play at one time is really quite remarkable. Well, that's liturgy. When the evangelical group in the late 1980s converted to Orthodoxy from Campus Crusade for Christ, they really set out to disprove Orthodoxy, and the opposite happened. And they really, read some of their letters and correspondence. The whole thing about liturgy was like, oh my gosh, they had this set formula for worship so very early in the life of the church. Because as evangelicals, what would they have been used to in terms of worship?
The Jewish temple.
Yeah, and free form, whatever comes to mind. Yeah, so, staid, boring liturgy, which isn't so staid and boring, and is certainly not the same all the time. It is around a structure, came into place very quickly. When you understand what worship was like in the temple and what Jews experienced and understood there, it's not so strange at all. So, this is an important text for understanding early Christian liturgy. And certainly, it's primary for understanding two of the great mysteries of the church, and I actually would say three, which is all three of the early Christian mysteries that were part of Christian initiation, which is the water rite of baptism, the oil with the sacred myrrh, chrism, and the reception of Holy Communion, the Eucharist. They're all there. And when you look at the significance of preparation for entry into the church through the first of these, the water rite baptism, it is really quite significant. And then there's a whole other study, which we'll get to when we're talking about confession in the church, confession of sins. What do you do with post-baptismal sin? That was a major kind of thing that the church had to work through, because guess what? We all do it. And what do you do with that? Okay? So, the pro-catechesis, pro means what, by the way? What did you say?
I didn't.
Oh, it's what? Pro.
Four.
And first. Okay. So, proto, presbyter, they're first among them. Okay. Senior. So the first of the catechesis of Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, which is somewhere around between 350, 387 is when he lived. And the mystagogical catechesis, ascribed and collated through these various manuscripts, are what we're looking at. And they were available in several ways. There's also a very interesting letter. It's called the letter from Macarius of Jerusalem. And there's another one, the letter to the Armenians, which is dated 335. I think I mentioned before that Armenia was the first country to actually totally embrace Christianity. It was the first fully Christian country. Okay, so this is an early response to the development of adult catechumenate in early Christianity. Okay, you ready? The Peace of Constantine, inaugurated in 313, I said 316, there's a correction, inaugurated in 313, marks an important turning point in the history of the Church. From an illegal religion, Christianity became legally tolerated, and this position was soon transformed into one of privileged liberty. The Christians rejoiced, and rightly so, in being able to profess their faith without being harassed. But this change brought with it grave new pastoral problems. That's the underscore. Pastoral problems, especially when it became the quote-unquote official religion instead of being only a permitted religion. So, Alan Kreider has stated something more differently, which also is very important, I think, for us to hear. He says, "It is clear that by the second half of the 4th century, we have entered into a new era in church history. Christianity has come to be the religion of royal appointment, and its numbers and its place in society were changing rapidly. Membership in the Christian church was now attractive in new ways, and it held out new opportunities for Christian influence. A few Christians publicly expressed hesitations with the newly developing order, but very few. Christendom, a Christian civilization with a common understanding of belief, belonging, and behavior, with widely shared forms of religious experience, was now dawning. Whoa. So when you and I speak about our country being founded on Judeo-Christian principles, what are we talking about?
Protestant.
Well, you're absolutely right. That was a largely Protestant understanding of what the Judeo-Christian traditions are. But this early in the church would be what?
Orthodox.
Judeo would be Jewish. So the early Jewish Christian.
Yeah. So the Ten Commandments would not have been abandoned. So if you're going to structure a civilization, the civilization will center around things like the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, those kinds of things for putting quote-unquote civilization in place. So sometimes people will talk about Western civilization, but it runs hand in hand because the Roman Empire, there was Old Rome in Italy and New Rome, named for Constantine, Constantinople, okay? So, the conversion of Constantine brought about the swift transformation of the church from a persecuted and fervent sect into a ruling and rapidly increasing body, favored and directed by the emperor. So, the emperor had a hand in all of this, right? Okay. How many of you know the flag on Mount Athos that's flying? It's a yellow flag with a black double-headed eagle on it. What is that double-headed eagle symbolic of? What?
Is that the Byzantine Empire?
Yeah, the Byzantine Empire, and the two-headed eagle is
Old Roman.
church and state, right? Okay. Yeah, emperor and patriarch. So they were seen as something that worked together. In such a context as this, as you see this sort of two-track thing happening, an organized pre-baptismal catechumenate, as we see developing through this period, becomes an absolute necessity. Nevertheless, it must be noted as well that this organized catechumenate represents both the rise and fall of the catechumenal process itself, a process which will eventually disappear with the great increase in infant baptisms, and especially with the theological justification for infant baptism later. So what are we talking about here? We have a highly developed catechetical process because you're converting non-Christians to Christianity. It's the great line of St. Nicholas of Japan to the samurai who was going to kill him. And he said, well, if you're going to kill me, you might as well know what you're going to kill me for. So he catechized him and he became Christian. His first convert. Yeah. Well, if you got to catechize a whole pagan society, eventually what happens?
They're all catechized.
They're all catechized, okay? So Christianity becomes the standard, the norm in the civilization. So who's left to be catechized?
The children.
Yeah, infants, babies being born to Christian parents. So that whole kind of highly developed catechetical process began to sort of disappear, and it was no longer needed. That's where there developed a problem, and it's a problem we still face as Eastern Orthodox Christians today, and that is there is the sense that Caesar will protect and preserve the faith. The culture will preserve the faith. And will it?
Not in America.
No, it doesn't. So we're seeing in our own time a sort of reconstitution of how we re-catechize and form our people on various levels. So cradle-born, I don't like the term, but it's works. People who were born into Orthodox families, baptized, chrismated, received the Eucharist from early life, they have to be catechized in the faith in a different track. And then there are the converts. You all are a kind of a different crowd, because I think each of you come with some type of Christian background, correct? More or less?
More or less.
Yeah. And that's actually very helpful, because it also means there's been this kind of assumption that, well, we're kind of all Christians, right? You know, we're Americans, you know. The Pew Survey shows that although there's the new interest in quote-unquote traditional Christianity, we are teetering on the brink of, at least in surveys, of people not identifying as Christian at the 50% mark. So about half of the culture is at the point where they don't have any quote-unquote Christian identity. But there is, as Tara Isabella Burton has done so beautifully in her book, they've developed a kind of smorgasbord, pick and choose, a little of this, a little of that, make it up as you go along on your own. Okay, so all of that is happening at a time in which those of you sitting around the table and those of you who are coming to us from the virtual world, you're part of another whole wave. And it's gotten the attention of so many people. And even looking at your ages and your families and children, you represent the significant core of the people that are knocking on the doors, and in some cases they're knocking on the windows because the doors are locked and they can't get in. Or when they find us, they can't get in. But anyway, that's all changing. So there are different levels. We have to catechize our teenagers. We have to catechize our young adults. We have to catechize our children. So the whole thing of looking back at what did the church expect in, say, the first 5 centuries of converts has become so very important to us today. So that's kind of where we are, and that's why we're going back to sources like Cyril of Jerusalem. Okay? Any questions so far? I know I'm going rapid. Yes?
Isn't it? Oh my gosh, you tossed me. Sorry. I heard that it was a lot of young men are coming towards traditional Christianity and young women are becoming more atheist. So I don't know if
You are right. There has been a huge wave of particularly young women embracing different forms of paganism, especially Wiccanism, witchcraft. Okay, it was seen as a way to have a sort of certain feminine power. That's breaking, and we're now seeing, particularly in traditional Roman Catholic churches and in Orthodox churches, young women coming in fairly large numbers who are coming from that kind of background. So we are seeing that's another shift in trend. But ahead of that, there were a lot of young men. And I say young men, like 35 and down. Okay, it's also, that movement has launched a couple of ridiculous articles. There was one in the New York Times that was just like, oh, come on, you know. But it was
the
there.
New York Times.
Do you remember the title?
Yeah. I don't remember the title. And if I think about it a little bit, I'll think about some of the people that were quoted, you know, as experts. But the point that they were trying to make is that these are basically sort of the rise of the Confederacy again, and you know, machismo, movements, that kind of thing. But one of the things that we are seeing again with this is there is a sense in which both men and women who are amongst this large group of people exploring Orthodoxy, they're serious about it. They don't want an Orthodox light. If they want that, they can go down to the Episcopal Church or Lutheran churches or Methodist churches or whatever, and they can get as light as they want. You won't even have to recite the Nicene Creed without crossing your fingers and toes, you know. So there you go. Because it won't have much meaning. Oh, this will get me some hate mail. There you go. Marvelous. Okay. So anyway, the pre-baptismal and post-baptismal rites themselves also began to take on numerous elements that were surely designed to heighten dramatically the experience and the emotions of those being initiated. So that's kind of what you were talking about there. There are people coming out of a certain kind of experience, which has left them hungry. And there's also this whole sense of sort of heightened drama, the experience, and particularly the emotions of those being initiated. Elements of the rites, as well as the creed and the Our Father, often kept secret from the baptismal candidates until after they had experienced or received them solemnly. And that's something we may launch into tonight to sort of cue it up. But next week, as I said, that's where we want to go. We want to go to the Nicene Creed, closely followed by the Our Father, because as you just learned here, those were not experienced by unbaptized eyes. You know, a very important figure in the early church during this period would have been the doorkeepers.
Was what?
The doorkeepers.
Oh,
Keeping track of who's coming through the door. And the doors, and wisdom let us attend. What does that mean?
Get out, catechumens.
Okay. The doorkeepers would close the doors, and what are we about to do?
I believe in one God.
Yeah, we're about to recite the Nicene Creed, okay? So they even wanted to make sure the doors were closed. Bet you didn't know that, did you?
So are we
Now
supposed
you
to-
know.
Are we supposed to leave?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, there was a period in which that was done. It would also mean that we would need to have enough formal catechists and deacons to be able to accompany the catechumens who would then be going off for instruction. That would be the time.
There are some places where that still continues.
Yeah. But as I said, you got to have a lot of catechists and a lot of deacons, and so few of our parish have that ability to do that. Okay, so the discipline of the secret was important for believers as well. They needed to be careful when they were around with catechumens to direct their inquiries back to those who were in charge of actually forming them in the faith. That's because Roman culture and society was absolutely rampant with all kinds of gossip about Christians. Maybe you know some of them. What were some of the things being said about, what do these Christians do, like when they close those doors?
They're cannibals.
They're what?
They're cannibals.
They're cannibals,
And
okay?
they commit incest.
Yes, okay. The fact that they were cannibals really did shake people in the Roman Empire. Yeah. This is my body, which is given for you. You can easily feed the rumor mill, right? And gossip. Yep. All kinds of things about orgies happening and whatever else. So it just simply raised that sense of suspicion about Christians. So Jerusalem has its importance. And the holy places in Jerusalem, they particularly captured the interest of Constantine and his mother, Helena, who visited the city in 326. And important sites were crowned with new churches, built under imperial supervision and at public expense. In Jerusalem itself, on the Mount of Olives, and at Bethlehem. You see, nobody here's been to Bethlehem, right? Yeah. One of the things that really sort of grabbed me as I was moving in Bethlehem towards the church of the Nativity of Christ, there is a star that marks the birthplace. As we were moving from the direction we were coming, I was shown the field for which there are references, and the field is still kept. It's beautifully manicured and kept, but that's where spotless lambs without blemish, were kept for the Passover sacrifice. And I mean, it literally almost kind of parallels the actual birthplace of Christ. It really sort of grabbed me. And then, coming inside, I grew up like all of you, because we're Westerners, with nativity sets and creches, like a little barn, away in a manger, away in a stable, something like that. Well, he was actually born in a cave, and when you actually see where he was born, it's like, oh, yeah, why was he born amongst animals?
Spotless lamb.
There was the census that was being taken, so the place was overcrowded. There was not room in the inn, no room at the hotel. So people had gathered in lots of places. So they had gathered in this particular cave, but that meant that the people were in the front large part of the cave. All animals were stabled in a connected but different part of the cave. So that's where the donkeys were, that's where the cows were, that's where the sheep were. Everything was back there. So, I mean, he was literally born in the midst of the stabled animals. Interesting. Yeah. And there's a star, which marks that place. By the way, it's Orthodox. Imagine that. Okay. So, at Jerusalem, the most important was a complex of buildings erected over the scene of our Lord's Passion. From the full account of Eusebius, who's Eusebius? He's a Jewish historian, and to read Eusebius is a fascinating read. You can get it all in English, his work. But from reading Eusebius, we deduce that it consisted of 3 structures. Okay, now we're not talking about Bethlehem and the Church of the Nativity. We're talking about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay? So the first is the anastasis. That's resurrection. In Greek, just before Pascha and Holy Week, they say Kalianastasis. Kalianastasi. A good Pascha to you. It's a round building erected over the site of the Holy Sepulchre, the martyrium, the place of suffering. A much larger oblong basilica on the spot where the cross was allegedly found. Who found that cross?
Saint Helen.
Helena, you know from Super Saints, okay? Under a patch of basil, which interesting enough means king. The Calvary, or the Golgotha, a small open-air structure or chapel on the site of the crucifixion. So all of these things were identified early, kept, and preserved. But with Constantine and Helen, they became places of religious pilgrimage. These buildings, as we now know, were begun shortly after the emperor's visit in 335, and a large council was held and summoned to Jerusalem, and the church was solemnly dedicated. Okay? So today, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is still largely in control of the Orthodox, but because of the Crusades, the Franciscans in the Latin tradition, they also have a period and some control, and the Armenians have some period in control, the 3. And because of that, guess who keeps the key and opens it up and closes it every day?
Your Orthodox patriarch?
Isn't it 2?
A Muslim family.
Oh,
Yeah.
neutral.
Yeah. And it's been generational. It's like 14 generations or something without a break have kept that key. And it's a very interesting ceremony in the morning or in the evening to watch them close it. Okay? So, Melania, the elder, was a young Roman widow who reached Palestine in 371. with the material help of one of her sons, she founded a large convent for nuns where she was to foster the religious life for over 25 years. In August, now look at these dates, in August of 385, St. Jerome and his younger brother, Paulinian, set out from Rome for their long stay in the east, arriving in Palestine in 386. Here they were joined by Paula and her daughter, Eustochium, Paula being specially commended by Jerome for her refusal to be received by the proconsul before she had visited the holy places. So what's that saying? That's where you get the great sayings of like Desert Fathers who say if you're walking down the street and the king is on this side and a priest is on this side, you go first and take the priest's blessing before you cross the street to acknowledge the king. Oh boy. That's something for you to chew on. But I'm pointing this out to you because it's here in the text. It's very early. So, sometimes in 2025 we encounter people who are like, we shouldn't call your priest father. And, who does your priest think he is? And this and that. And what are you doing? I remember in the Walmart in Kodiak. Seraphima, did you go to the Walmart when you were in Kodiak?
Yeah, and I went a couple other places too.
Yeah. Well, the Walmart in Kodiak, at least in my day, was known as the world's smallest Walmart.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Yes. But, any priest who would go in there are so many Orthodox people that you go down any aisle and somebody's going to stop and ask you for a blessing. So it's really interesting when you've got even visiting Orthodox people from the lower 48. They're like, what's going on here? And you just have to say, well, it's cultural. But they certainly have preserved that down through culturally, that's part of the respect that's shown for the one who stands at the altar and brings forth Christ in the Eucharist from these hands. So this all reflects the sort of account from recognizing that they had a sort of newfound paradise in Jerusalem, where all of these things which they had learned about, they could now experience. In the years between 381 and 384, there's another Spaniard. Her name is Egeria. I've mentioned her before. Some people, by the way, will translate Egeria as Sylvia. I don't know where that tradition comes from. But she was most likely a nun from Spain. She reached Palestine after a very long voyage. And her detailed record with its account of daily prayer and the ceremonies of Palm Sunday and Holy Week, together with the other feasts and seasons, makes her work one of the most important liturgical documents of the 4th century. And I'd actually say it's simply one of the most important liturgical documents of the early church, period. Okay? So, take a breath. Any questions? I know I'm going kind of quick pace here. Yes?
You said you visited Russia, right?
I have, yes, several times.
Was it like the Kodiak Walmart everywhere in Russia, where people would constantly ask you for your blessing? Or in other words?
Well, I think with most communist countries, there's still this residue of watching over your shoulder and being careful about appearing to be too religious, because the Soviet Union was an official atheist state, persecuting the church and Christians. There's still some of that. But again, particularly with the young, often newly baptized, especially when I was making trips to Russia in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Yeah, you would have that. I was looking like this, and I needed to go to a mall, just like an American mall, and there was a soldier standing outside one of the shops, and as I walked by, he did this, and asked for a blessing. And I remember that really did strike me. I thought, I don't think that would ever happen in America.
Never said a word, he just did that.
Yeah, I'm walking past him, and I heard and he stood like motionless, to get that blessing. He was in uniform. Yeah. So yeah, it's there. So this is all laying the groundwork, and I think we've got just about the right timing to then go into the rites of Christian initiation at Jerusalem. And those three rites would be baptism, chrismation, and Eucharist. So people were now making pilgrimages. We still make pilgrimages. I noticed I put a poster up on that bulletin board over there for the monastery outside Kansas City. On the 19th of this month, there will be a pilgrimage to the monastery. Canterbury Tales and all of that stuff, down through the ages. But the whole idea of going to Jerusalem to visit the holy sites became the center of liturgical influence everywhere, second to none throughout the Christian world. But as the exporter of liturgical practices elsewhere, and as an importer of practices as well. Thanks to the multiple Jerusalem liturgical sources we possess, we are able to reconstruct the various liturgies in Jerusalem quite easily. Common and widespread practices, such as, for example, the feast of the presentation of the Lord, the procession with the palms on Palm Sunday, and the veneration of the cross on Good Friday, are all attested for the first time at Jerusalem by Egeria, and her witness to what has been termed both the cathedral and the monastic liturgy of the hours and of the 4th century is invaluable. Okay? So, what are we talking about here that's important for us in 2025? The cathedral and the monastic liturgical experience. I brought you to 2025.
We're still doing it.
We're still doing it, but what does it mean? Cathedral, i.e. parish, and monastic liturgical practice. Well, if you visit a monastery, you will note that they are literally praying continually. Even when they're working the garden or scooping out manure from the barn or whatever their task has to be. It is Opus Dei. It is the work of God. That's one way of keeping your prayer life. It's heavy. Okay? In the parishes, it was different, right? It had to be, because people had a livelihood, people had families. And so how things were structured, and this is still a bit of a tension today. There are priests like myself who are very sensitive to the fact that we need to function as a parish. And that means accommodating people as best we can with the rhythm of the prayer life of the church, but without going to the full kind of maximalist monastic way of doing things. It's a big mistake that a lot of zealous young priests make where they try to turn their parishes into monasteries. And why is that? Oh, there's a mosquito in here. Lord have mercy. Okay. Go that way.
Be gone.
Yeah, be gone. So why does that become a problem? You see him?
Yeah,
I did, yeah.
I think he's fine. Hopefully.
Did I get him?
I think so.
Oh, good. I hope so. They see the top of my head and they think it's a landing field. It's really, it's a terrible burden for me to bear.
May I offer a thought on that one?
Sure.
It seems to me that if a priest tries to push a more monastic form on his people, that ends up distorting the appropriate rhythm or whatever you want to call it, the appropriate life of a church with multiple families, children, all of that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And there's multiple ways it can be distorted.
Yeah.
It can become very fundamentalist, it can become very legalistic, in a way that interferes with normal family life.
There are things that we do in parishes that you wouldn't do in monasteries. Now, you were asking me about the Orthodox majority countries. It's lovely. I mean, you'll find in like Romania or Serbia, Orthodox families with children will go off to the monastery on a Sunday, and they will spend all day there. They'll have packed a picnic, and after liturgy, they'll be out on the grounds and all of that. But it's very interesting, like Mount Sinai, which has been in the news of late, and we keep praying, that the Egyptian government will leave them alone. The monks will say, we must practice hospitality, but it's very difficult keeping our own rhythm while we're trying to deal with all of this. And that's why, like at the monasteries, many times the doors are closed, so they can actually keep their Hezekiah, their rhythm, like that. And it's also important for parish priests, and we don't have monasteries that are all that close. Oklahoma, Colorado, now Missouri. And none in Kansas. Yeah, none. There once was an attempt in Wichita. But if we had a monastery that was, 2 miles in this direction, as your parish priest, I'd be saying to you, it's wonderful for you to visit it on occasion, and I encourage you to do so, but this is where you work out your salvation. It's in the context of your parish church. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Okay, so we're watching the clock, but I point this out to you. It means that there were kind of 2 tracks of development, all right? So there's also, of course, the development of the bishop's chair. And at the great church of the martyrium, all those who were baptized, the men and the women, would sit around him in a circle, okay? Well, it's in our latest e-news. I took a photograph of what I called the proper name, not the bishop's chair or the bishop's throne, but it is the cathedra. And the cathedra means it's the stool in the cathedral, Church of the Martyrium, where the bishop sits to give instruction. So it's like his professor's teaching stool, so to speak. Okay? So we got that down? Okay, great. So it's marvelous. At All Saints, we now have the bishop's cathedral that's elevated. There are 2 in Orthodox tradition. There's one in the high place behind the altar and one in the front. That's because there are actually 2 parts of the liturgy. There's one in which the bishop resides for the liturgy of the word outside, and one where he comes inside for the liturgy of the mystery of the sacrament. Okay? All right, so the bishop's subject, this was an important part for those preparing for baptism, centered around the law, God's law, and during the 40 days, there we go, 40 days of Great Lent, he goes through the whole Bible, beginning with Genesis and first relating the literal meaning of each passage, then interpreting its spiritual meaning. He also teaches all of them at this time about the resurrection and the faith. And they gave this name catechesis. So catechesis is centered around the giving of the law, the transformation of the law by Christ. It says he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it, to complete it. And the whole place of the resurrection and our faith. So after 5 weeks of teaching, they receive the Creed, whose content he explains in the same way as he explains the Scriptures, first literally and then spiritually. At 9 o'clock, they are dismissed from the catechesis, and the bishop is taken with singing straight to the anastasis, the church. So the dismissal is at 9, which makes 3 hours teaching a day for 7 weeks. You guys think you got it bad, right? Okay, imagine that. So that's 3 hours of teaching, 3 hours a day for 7 weeks. But in the 8th, known as the Great Week, i.e. Great and Holy Week, as we call it now, there is no time for them to have their teaching if they are to carry out all of the services. So when 7 weeks has gone by, the bishop comes early into the great church. His chair is placed at the back of the asp, so that's where it is located now. We have two. One in the, if this was a proper Orthodox church, we'd actually have an asp on that side of the altar, okay? Where'd I go? The bishop comes in early, goes to the church. His chair is placed in the back of the asp behind the altar, and one by one the candidates go up to the bishop, men with their godfathers and women with their godmothers, and repeat the creed to him. When they have done so, the bishop speaks to them as follows. Okay, so here's a quote. During these 7 weeks you have received instruction in the whole biblical law. You have heard about the faith and the resurrection of the body. You have also learned all you can as catechumens of the content of the creed. But the teaching about baptism itself is a deeper mystery, and you have not the right to hear it while you remain catechumens. Do not think it will never be explained. You will hear it all during the 8 days of Pascha, after you have been baptized. But so long as you are catechumens, you cannot be told God's deep mysteries. So that's how sacred they held it at that time. Okay? Now, here's a little pause as we're getting close to wrap-up time. I said this is a different situation in 2025 because all of you acknowledge you come from some kind of Christian background. What did you say?
Sort of.
Yeah, somewhat. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's like my youngest son said, growing up in Kansas, he said, if you weren't much of anything in Kansas, you'd say, oh, I'm just a Methodist. That meant that you weren't much of anything.
Just a what?
A Methodist. I'm just a Methodist. Okay. They've lost ground, and now the majority church in Kansas are Roman Catholics. But it's different, and that means that I'm dealing with you as catechumen, but you already know certain things, and you have been through baptismal rites outside the Orthodox tradition. That's where we have a current modern issue and debate, which God willing might be satisfied and come to a conclusion that's universal. Maybe before the Lord calls me home, I don't know. But in Orthodoxy, there's been this understanding that we may receive people by chrismation who have been baptized with water in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. That's a kind of economia, and an economia is a sort of accommodation to things. But there's more and more of an understanding that we actually, because of the wide variance and differences in practices in the various Protestant churches, particularly, that we can't trust that anymore. The person may have a baptismal certificate that says in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, but in fact their clergyman or clergywoman who baptized them may have baptized them in the name of the Mother, Lover, Friend, or in the name of the Creator, Redeemer, Sanctifier. That's another one
That's good.
that's popular out there. Okay, so what do we do with that? And I had a conversation with a guy who was doing some work on the house next door to mine, who said to me, "You're a priest, right?" "Yeah." I said, "Of the Most High God." They always have a tough time come to terms with that one, but it gets immediate respect, by the way. So he had a question about, is it necessary that one be baptized by full immersion? Okay, well, what is our practice? In Orthodoxy, we do triple immersion 3 times in the name of the Holy Trinity, and we immerse, including babies. But we also have the patristic teachings that's the normal way with running water. But if you don't have running water, you may use still water. And if you don't have that much to get everybody in it, you use what you have, including maybe only enough to pour over the head with a shell. And it even goes on to say that, if you're in prison facing death and a person converts to Christianity, baptize them with sand from the floor, if that's all you have. So we accommodate, but Bishop Basil, once, I think probably teaching in this very room, said to us there were some questions about that, and he said that he can best explain it, that those baptisms outside of the Orthodox Church that we can't be sure about are kind of like a lamp. All of the parts are there, but it actually takes chrismation to get the light on, because chrismation actually completes the rite. So some people here are received by baptism, and some are received by chrismation, and that has to be weighed with whatever your particular backgrounds come from. What about if you're a Mormon?
You would have to be baptized, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So there are things like that. Okay, and when we get closer, we'll collect certain things like that. Okay. I also need to see proof. I've seen Mary Magdalene's, who was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church as a baby. Okay. So are we good so far? We're kind of right up to 8. Well, I think that's probably a good place to draw the line. There's some things, again, that are simply confirmed by the writings of Egeria. But we'll stop here. I'll see if I can clean up any messes. And then next week we'll look at St. Gregory of Nyssa. And that won't take as much time as Cyril of Jerusalem. And then we're going to launch into the question of the Creed. And we'll get that ball rolling. So is that good? Yeah. You all are very patient, and I know, after long days and other such things, it's kind of tough. But any questions? Any clarifications? I already clarified one thing. I said 3:16, and it's 3:13.
So I was curious. We've got 3 kids. So what does that look like for us?
What's that?
What does it look like for our children with us being catechumens and wanting to?
Okay. So are any of your children baptized? Okay. So when you're received, you will baptize your children, because your children come in with you, and that's clearly was the early practice of the church as well.
So are we bringing them up to the front when we go up there as well?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. Yeah. Yeah. As I said, Jews would never think of excluding their children from their place in the covenant relationship with God, and neither do we. Since at least one of you has this Anglican lineage, okay, when I was doing my Master of Sacred Theology work, which is focused on the primitive rites of initiation, baptism, chrismation, and Eucharist, I came across a person named Thomas Deacon. And Thomas Deacon was an Anglican clergyman in the 1600s who was able to read things in Greek from the early church. And he came to the conclusion, I am not excommunicating my children when I baptize them. He said it makes no sense. I bring them in to the church through baptism, and then I immediately excommunicate them until such time as they're confirmed later in life. So he began communing his own children from the time they were baptized. So that was a great nugget for me to find, by the way.
You mean how Roman Catholics don't allow children to take communion to adults?
Yes, and I think that if you're actually reading educated Roman Catholic liturgical scholars, and there are some absolutely fabulous ones there, outstanding. Many of them are saying the order is wrong in the modern Church of Rome, and that they need to find their way back to the pattern that's practiced amongst the Orthodox. Now, here's something I'll be critical of the Orthodox for. There are Orthodox priests who will do private baptisms. This priest does not, because baptism is a right of the community, not a private affair. That was a real problem in post-communist era, because during the communist times they would have to baptize often secretly, in the bathtub at home or something, and people began to think that was normal. It's not normal, it's abnormal. But a priest who will do the water rite baptism and the chrismation, and then they say, well, come back, Sunday or whenever it's convenient, and we'll commune. No, it needs to be done all at the same time. And so some have the practice of baptizing, chrismating, and communing from the reserved sacrament. That's the sacrament that's reserved on the altar for the sick and the dying, mostly. I think that within the Orthodox Church, there's been a significant recapturing of the baptismal liturgy, because baptism should in fact take place in the context of the liturgy. So it's all done at once. That'll get me some hate mail too. So I've even served only once, a wedding in the context of the Sunday morning liturgy, because weddings were also done there. That's why we have the common cup and the sips. Yeah. You all seen an Orthodox wedding before?
Just my big fat Greek wedding.
Yeah, well, I guess that counts.
I don't know if that's
That counts for a little bit there, yes, Yeah, well, wait till you get to see one. Very nice. Yes.
Another question. What does how, I don't know how to ask this. We weren't married in the eyes of God. How does that work?
Okay, so you were legally married?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, that's a significant question. So when you are received, at some point we can also do the crowning, which is part of the wedding rite, and that will do it. Okay. I don't know, Seraphima, I think it's been done here even after my time here, like people on a wedding anniversary. For older couples that were never married in the Orthodox Church, there is the crowning. In the Greek Orthodox Church,
Sarah did that.
In the Greek Orthodox Church, all converts, whether they were married in the Methodist Church or Presbyterian Church or whatever, are also married as part of the conversion. Ria Tekli and I were actually crowned by Bishop Basil on our wedding anniversary in the little chapel that was behind the chancery. And we also did the rings, and that's why I wear my wedding ring on my right hand, because in the Orthodox wedding rite, the ring goes on the right hand, not the left. Who's going to ask me why?
Because it's pagan on the left.
What's
It's
that?
a pagan custom on the left, right? Because of the vein of the heart that they.
Yeah, you know what, you're going to be just fine. We're liking you more and more, Yes.
I am.
Yes. In the Middle East in particular, the right hand is the right hand of honor. And this is the hand for other things, okay? So in the Quran, a thief has his right hand cut off. What does that mean?
He can't eat.
Well, he's going to starve to death because he can't eat with this hand, okay? And so in the West, they did pick up the cultural pagan thing of heart side from there, okay? But the eastern part of the empire preserved the idea of the right hand being the hand of honor. Yes.
So if we are not being baptized, we're being chrismated, will that be like up in the temple or will that be in the narthex? Because when James was baptized, he was chrismated in the narthex.
When who was?
James, when he was baptized, he
Yes.
was chrismated in the narthex. So I was
Yeah,
curious.
as part of the baptismal rite. So we'll actually chrismate you all in the narthex as well,
Okay.
because the narthex is seen as the place of entry. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. You all are just terrific people. No one's been blackballed. You'll be glad to hear that.
That makes sense.
Oh. I don't know what that means.
Okay. Well, through the prayers of our holy fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us and save us. Thank you all.